Welcome back to another episode with the Communication Queens. Today we're here with
Sierra Coronado,
Elizabeth Guardiola,
Sequoia Callahan,
and Brooke Meads. Today we're going to be talking about the importance of listening, how to be a better listener, and how this applies to the larger context of mental health. So let's start off with some general tips on how to listen.
All right. Well, our text, The Art of Communication, written by Randy Hujivin, it has a chapter dedicated to the importance of listening. Listening goes beyond just like staying quiet while someone else is talking. It's not just waiting for your turn to speak. A good listener participates in the process of receiving, attending, understanding, responding, and remembering. According to our text, studies have shown that we only remember 25% of what we hear after 2 days.
Yeah, and overall listening, it's a long process. Like she said, you're having to go through the understanding, all of those different things before the actual responding part. And some ways to kind of listen or kind of body language that will help your listening is some eye contact. So to make sure that you're making eye contact with whoever you're talking to, and to make sure that you're actually speaking facing the speaker, because that's also important as well. Often nodding can be really helpful to make sure that they know that you're listening and that they know that you're understanding what they're saying and actually comprehending it. And some benefits that come from listening is you have fewer misunderstandings, so you're not misunderstanding what they're saying, you're not kind of judging what they're saying automatically. You have improved relationships, so of course this is a huge one. Your relationships are just going to get better by listening instead of just constantly talking and trying to get your word out instead of letting them get their word out. You're going to improve your relationships by this. And then overall, it's just a part of personal growth. You're going to become more open-minded when you're listening, and you're going to be able to explore different viewpoints and different ideas, which is something that a lot of people don't understand, is that you need to be able to be a good listener in order to expand your viewpoints and really become who you are, because without that, you end up kind of becoming closed-minded in the end. So that's some important ways.
Definitely. You know, in a study that I found, it was from September 2007, it was from Dr. Monisha Pusupati. They actually did a study on proper listening, and they studied the psychology of memory and, how much people remember from, whether they're distracted. And they showed that the people that were distracted whenever they were, in this conversation with the scientist, they ended up remembering less of what they were saying rather than when they were in a closed environment and they were looking the person in the eye, which that's really cool to me, to show that there's scientific proof talking about, non-distracted listening is going to be better for your relationships because you're going to be remembering more of what the people around you were saying.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's a really interesting idea, actually. And to bounce off of that, what I went ahead and did, applying to this context of listening, I went into a book which is actually called Counseling and Therapy Skills by David G. Martin. And I think that, who is a better listener than therapists? They do that for a living. Mm-hmm. So we can kind of take tips from them and apply them to ourselves. I think one of the most important things when it comes to listening is empathy, and demonstrating that you have that empathy and are empathetic with the person that you're talking to. And a good distinction to make is empathy versus sympathy. In the text, I like the quote that says, "Sympathy implies pity, empathy implies trust." You don't want to make someone feel like you're pitying them or like you feel sorry for them. You want to make them feel like there's someone that they can trust to talk to about whatever they want to. Another quote from the book is that empathy is to help the other person face her experience, to face what she feels and thinks but can't quite look at clearly. When you're talking to someone, it's kind of easy for you to get lost in your own problems and kind of have this fog and haze where you can't really look at the situation clearly. But when you talk about it to someone else, you can kind of get a different perspective, lay it all out on the table and face what you're dealing with. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really easy for us to when we're talking to someone about something like this, to be like, oh yeah, like I feel like the exact same way, like that situation just happened to me like last week, um, or like, yeah, it can be like that sometimes, or kind of like brush it off.
I think it's just kind of, it can be demeaning for someone to have to relate to everything constantly, and it doesn't always have to come back to about you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the biggest thing that people do without even realizing it is we feel automatically the need to just be like, oh yeah, well that happened to me one time, and then it just makes people feel like their position is not as valid as what you're saying. So I think that's something that definitely people need to work on trying to limit.
Yeah, it's like you're kind of belittling the other person's situation. Like you can wait your turn, but be sure to like acknowledge what they're saying first.
Yeah, like, I mean, listening is so important, even like when it comes to like war veterans. Even, you know, a few years ago I went to a seminar from the president of research on PTSD. He was from Boston University, and he was talking about how, I mean, PTSD wasn't even a real area of study until right around the 1970s, kind of Vietnam War era. And what they were talking about was overall the best way for, veterans coming back, the best way for them to get over the issues that they were facing was to talk about it. It was crazy. I mean, they were studying all these kinds of different treatments, and ultimately the best way, just the best treatment that they had was just talking to somebody about it and properly being able to listen, or properly being able to be heard by somebody, it's so important, even with, what I've seen in my own life, just being able to talk about, issues that I've had in my life, with somebody that I know is listening, and can help me through that. I mean, that it makes all the world of difference.
For sure.
Because once you get it out of you into somebody that is, is listening to you,
right.
I mean, they can help you work through it.
Yeah.
And it overall is just going to make your quality of life better. And I think that only just highlights the necessity of good people that are good at listening, and know how to listen, and know just kind of how to get people to talk about things,
Yeah. And I feel like having that person to listen is, a lot of times it can be hard, and not everyone has that outlet for people to be able to listen, so they don't really know how to. And I think this kind of brings us into our conversation about counseling and mental health, because honestly, a lot of times it's kind of taboo to talk about, and we don't talk about mental health, and we don't talk about the idea that we need someone to listen to us. And I feel like it just needs to be more aware. People need to be more aware of the fact that counseling, or the importance of counseling, and how much it can help when someone is listening to you and you're not having to kind of vent to just random people sometimes, so yeah. I think that can be super important as well.
Yeah, and going off of that, of this kind of stigma around mental health issues, there's so much like taboo around it. But according to statistics I found from the National Institute of Mental Health, 18.9% of U.S. adults suffer with mental illness, and that's even higher among young adults between 18 to 25 years old, where the rates are 25.8%. So that's like over 1 in every 5 people in our college age group that are suffering with mental illness, yet there's this huge stigma around it. It's a really common thing, but it's almost as if it's abnormal or not normal.
Yeah. And you can see that clearly. I mean, we all go to college here, and how often do you see flyers posted on the wall promoting our counseling program? I mean, we have free counseling, so it's something that should be promoted, and it's really not.
Yeah, it's one thing I really enjoy about St.
But
Mary's.
The other thing is not everyone is going to talk about mental health, or not everyone's going to be willing. According to the National Alliance on Mental Illness, mental health professionals believe a condition called anosognosia, not sure if I said that right, but it pretty much contributes to people failing to seek treatment. So it's people that really have this inability to actually recognize that they do have mental illness, or that they do need help. And this is one of the biggest things is people don't even they're not aware of it, and there's no one to help them become aware of it, so it's becoming an issue that's kind of more prominent as well.
A lot of people actually, like, there's a tendency to misdiagnose this type of thing. It's just so common, and like there's no like actual symptoms to prove it to be like an illness, and so that's what causes so many people to like misinterpret it or kind of brush it off. In fact, like majority of adolescents, they don't acknowledge this illness until like maybe 12 months after. This study shown, there was a study written by Julie Fisher, the development of guidelines for adults on how to communicate with adolescents, basically about these mental health issues and other sensitive topics. In this article, she talks a little bit about how those adolescents, they fail to recognize that they're going through this at least a year prior. These kids tend to lean on their friends and their family as opposed to like professional help because they seek that familiarity and the comfort of like trusting relationships. While, you know, there's professionals out there who literally study this for like years. They seek out us, and I think that's why it's so important for us to be able to learn, be willing to learn, be willing to talk about this. You know, like don't create it as a stigma. Just be willing to help because they seek us out. They don't seek out professionals till they like it's like a last resort for them, and it's
Yeah, and I just think that like you said, it's important for people to recognize and be educated on this. At the same time, we're not all counselors here. We're not here to diagnose anyone, but we need to be here to listen to people and to advocate for them when they're not able to advocate for themselves.
Yeah, we're here to encourage people to go and seek out the proper help. And while it might be hard to talk to somebody that you don't really know, I mean, it's always easier talking to family or friends, but that's not always the best option for you or for them. The best option is seeking out professional help from people that know how to handle these kinds of situations.
right, for sure.
And with that, I think that's a good place to wrap up.
I wanted to make one last comment.
Go for it, yeah.
Well, I think that the best way that we could spread this awareness, like I said before, is to start while kids are young, to bring it to their awareness. If you teach them while they're young, they can grow up and, you know, they have a solid understanding of what depression and anxiety is and what it entails. And over time, hopefully, they could develop those good communication and hopefully listening skills, most of all, when they come across those friends and family who do suffer from these mental health problems. Like I said, adolescents who suffer from depression, they seek out their friends and their family. So I feel like that's most important, that we're first line, basically. We're out there. We need to try to go ahead and be more supportive of that.
I totally agree. And with that, I say that's a good place to wrap up. Make sure to tune in next week. Thanks for listening so much.